Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Thanks for showing up. It's great to see you.
Yeah.
So, I would love for you to start off the podcast with telling our listeners briefly about your background and how you learned to paint.
Um, I was inspired by my mom who painted murals on my bedroom wall, pastoral scenes, and she would do Disney artwork on the window shades. I was a big fan of The Sword in the Stone and Merlin when I was little, and so that sort of thing would be on the window shades. And I spent a lot of time in the woods and streams around our house, and I think those between mom and that time in nature it inspired me. But I went to college to blow glass, and the painting profs at that time had come back to double dip, and they really just didn't care too much about anything and said, here is your supplies, go and paint. And if you've never painted, you don't learn very much that way. So in 2004, while I was teaching art 1 through 12, I decided to host nationally known artists for week-long workshops in the evenings at the school for area artists. And so I got to meet some wonderful artists and try to learn from each of them a little each time.
And that's how you started. So then it just grew from there. You just kept painting. And did they teach you oil or did you teach yourself oil?
Um, I would host a watercolor workshop and then alternate with oils. So I had both, and one of the earliest was I met a friend who has become a very good friend and mentor, Stephen Walker, and he's probably the most responsible. But I've had workshops with Stephen Fox, who's an amazing painter, Peter Fiore, Mary White, Scott Lloyd Anderson, Dave Santianis. So a lot of very well-known artists.
Wow. Yeah, it's definitely helpful to learn from others who have grown through that journey and figured out their own path and their own style, and just to get all that exposure to different artists and their ways.
Yes.
Now, you were talking about glass blowing, which is a really interesting connection. How did glass blowing influence the way that you paint?
The I had Robert Bud Hurlstone as a prof for glass blowing, and we spent a lot of time talking about aesthetics and what makes a good piece, and that carries into painting as much as the three-dimensional nature of the glass sculptures that we were doing. And also, he talked about why are we using glass, and so you start to think about why are we using watercolors or why are we using oils and the nature of those medium. And I like the transparency of glass and try to carry that and those luminous colors into my paintings.
Yeah, you succeed, especially
Well,
when you're
thank you.
painting. Yes, absolutely. I love to see your sunlight on water in the streams that you paint, and it's just gorgeous. So,
Well, I really appreciate it.
yeah, absolutely. It's you do a beautiful job. And I'd love for you to talk for a minute about tips that you would have for our listeners on being able to paint the influence of sunlight in their paintings.
I, I I always tell my students jokingly, teasingly, that if you see red here where you're looking, you paint red in the same place on the canvas. That's the secret to everything. And with glass, that's especially true because you're painting the reflections and the refractions or what you're seeing through the glass, and you can't really see clear. You're seeing the effects of the light passing through or reflecting off of the glass. So you have to really, I know it sounds cliche, but you have to paint what you see.
But that's a really good point because you are reiterating what we really all need to remember, I think, as painters, which is paint the effects of the light refracting, not getting intimidated by the idea of how do I paint the light through the glass, paint how it's affecting everything around it.
exactly.
And so that does come down to painting what you see as far as reflected light and the influence of it on all the other hues.
One of the neat things about glass too is it'll it has halos. And I find that in light reflecting off leaves or passing through leaves in the water. So I try to carry that into the painting as well.
Yeah, and I think that that requires some bravery because the halos really, if you think about it too much, instead of painting what you see, you can get stuck in, well, why am I putting this red on this leaf when the leaf is green, and overthinking it and getting kind of tight, you know?
Yes. Perfect.
So, what did your career look like when you got out of school? And talk about that and how you got to where you're at now. Are you painting full time now as your full focus? Do you have other things involved? What does your life look like as an artist?
I'm sitting in the studio and I should turn the camera so that you can see what my life chaos my life is usually like. But when I graduated from college, I graduated in December and I stayed an extra semester and blew glass and sold the glass to kind of pay for things along the way. And I told the college prof I planned on teaching. And I told my ed prof that I can't find an opening, let alone get the job. Somebody has to die for you to have an opening for teaching art. And he said, let me look. The next morning he called and he said, the job is yours. You have it if you want it. There wasn't even an application. They walked me through the school and said, what do you think? And it's in this town where I live. And I taught here 11 years and took 2 years off and started a greeting card company. If you bought a car, you got a thank you note or a birthday card from the auto dealership, and they're kind of cartoony. And Jordan, my son, got hurt a couple times, and we needed insurance. And I thought, well, I'll teach another year or two just to have the insurance. And it ended up being 15 years teaching in the next town over. But I realized I wasn't learning fast enough. There isn't time. If you want to teach well, it's very difficult to do your own thing on the side. And I quit. I just made the leap. And I had friends who said, you can do it. And it probably was a very foolish decision, but it's worked out. So I guess it's okay.
Wow. Yeah, I think it depends on your comfort level and your situation, definitely with your family and your needs, like you said, insurance or, you
Yeah.
know, the different requirements of your particular situation. But good for you that's definitely not my comfort level, but I think that that's amazing that you went for it and it worked out. That's
Well,
good.
when I left teaching, it was the end of the school that I was in. Literally, I teased them that there was no competing, so they just tore the building down and built a new one. But they did commission me to do a 32-foot mural in the new building. And so that paid for the first 6 months of my career as a full-time artist. And that's it. If I don't paint, we don't eat. The bills don't get paid because there's no other income. And it's finally really getting to a pretty comfortable level.
So how did that start out then? How did you go from, okay, here's where I'm at now, I'm out there, to getting other commissions after that 32-foot mural? And were they oil painting commissions? What did it look like being out on your own suddenly?
I did a little bit of everything, which I think maybe is a good path when you're first starting out. You just do whatever you can get your hands on and take any art job that's available. And I painted murals in a local mall quite often, and I did a few murals here and there for other things. There's one in the Columbus Zoo. Um, but I I eventually got jobs like Dayton Children's Hospital has over 50 36 by 36 images that I've done, and they're cartoony and they're there to make the kids feel good when they come in. They just bought 9 more. And one, for an example, one of them is porcupines. They're all based on flight. Dayton is the home of the Wright brothers. So all of the images are flight related. And the hedgehogs, there's 3 hedgehogs, each on a donut, and they're for a boat, and they have a sail and they're flying through the air on these donuts. So they're imaginative and whimsical, and it's not always landscape work. But I got a gallery, and that gallery led to another gallery, and having galleries, and I was winning national contests in magazines, and it just keeps snowballing. And you tell the next place, well, I have a gallery, and they feel comfortable taking you on, and it just keeps going from there.
So you're currently still doing a mix of commissions and work for, say, like the hospital work and different assignments, and mixing that in with your landscape pursuits. It's kind of a kaleidoscope right now.
I do not as much, but I really enjoy the Dayton Children's work.
Yeah.
So I do that whenever they offer, and I'm just thrilled to have the work there. And I do portraits occasionally, commissioned portraits when people ask, but at this point, it's mostly the landscape work. I've been really lucky and gotten into some of the big auctions. And that seems to be my market, the big shows and the big auctions.
How do you get into the big auctions?
You pray a lot and you hope that somebody, the right people, see your work. I got into the Russell first, the CM Russell show, which is difficult to get into. And I don't know if they just really liked what I sent them. And the Coors Brewery family bought my painting that first time. And so I had that notoriety to tell the next auction, hey, I was in the Russell. The Coors family bought this painting. Like, wow, we want to have you in ours too. So, and it like I said, it just snowballs and it keeps going.
So humor me and pretend I don't know anything about auctions as far as compared to competitions. How do you pursue auctions instead and go straight to that venue?
I don't know if you can go straight to that. Maybe you could if you were really good and really lucky. I think no matter what, I don't mean to get us sidetracked here, but I think no matter what path you take, the work has to be good, or it's just nothing's going to work. And if you, in my case, I use that snowball to show the auctions that my work was selling, and it was selling for increasingly higher prices. And one of the big shows told me, we have been watching your work, but your price isn't where we want the bottom to be yet. And so when it gets, and I kept telling them, it's getting closer, and they were watching, and it got there. And so I'm in the show.
So it was a question of naturally not just raising your price, because it seems to me they wanted the prices higher, that it wasn't just an issue of raising your prices, but naturally showing a history of selling your prices at that higher number. And
Yes.
was it through galleries that you had to show this?
Yeah, well, not just galleries, but yeah, I mean, I was starting to get commissions for higher prices, and so I had that to show to them. Yeah, a little
Like,
bit
what
of
kind of proof did they require?
it's not so much, you don't show them a sales receipt or anything like that, but they were watching my website, and they could see that the prices were going up and that the pieces were being marked sold. So I guess you could cheat and mark them sold and they wouldn't know, but
I wouldn't recommend it.
mine really were selling, so I was lucky.
Wow. Okay. So you just went to get, what was how did you get into your first auction? I guess is what I'm asking, from competitions. How did you make that leap, the transition?
They do have auctions have submission protocol, and it's usually listed on the website. And you just follow through and hope that you're included. Some of them are by invitation. They've watched the Autry is a good example. They've seen how you've done other places, and then you get invited if you're in that big top group. But other ones you have to literally apply to, and you show them 10 or 12 pieces of work with the prices of the work and your resume. And if you're in the right spot and you have the right work, you get in.
So for auctions, you have to have a record of a certain amount of sales, I would think, established.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple artists who have popped onto the scene and been phenomenal from the word go. That's not me. I had to build my career, but those lucky people get in right away. So
Now, your work is prolific. I mean, it seems like you have many paintings that you have done and are just always adding. So how did you make time to paint as you transitioned from your day work, so to speak, to mostly selling your fine art paintings of preference, meaning your landscapes and your Western genre paintings?
it I knew that it was going to be a full-time job. I'm a slow painter. And when I say full-time, I mean from the time I wake up till the time I go to bed, that kind of thing. And I don't mind that. I really actually enjoy painting, the physical process of painting and the mixing of the paints. I really like doing that. So it's not a problem to do it all day long. And so when it comes to making time, the making time is more for getting up and having a sandwich or all of those things that you wish you could take care of and don't get taken care of because you are painting 60, 80 hours a week. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's the fastest way to get better, is to just paint.
It really, and that was the point. I had to make that leap. I knew I needed that saturation of painting and painting and painting.
So as you got exposure to this, when you started doing the workshops, when you were teaching, this just lit your fire. I mean, you got your degree in glass, and then you started teaching, and you were teaching in K through 12, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was art of all kinds and all genres, and you just found that this was your happy place.
that's 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 a good way to put it, I guess. I never really thought about it quietly, but yes. I started with watercolors and didn't do oils at all to begin with. And the watercolors, I was maybe one of those people who was lucky and took off, and they were pretty successful right from the start. The first local show that I entered, I got best of show. The first time I entered the Ohio Watercolor Society, I won a prize. And there are people who enter it, it sounds like bragging, but that's not. It's celebratory. There are people who enter and never win. And I just was lucky and won right off the bat. And again, that's part of the snowball. You can say, I've won this major prize. And it was a happy place. But if I could blow glass all the time, that would be great. It's a very expensive thing to do. And I really enjoy painting. So yeah, I guess long story short, yeah, it's my happy place.
Well, and I think it brings up a good point in that you talked about not blowing your own horn, but really, I think in order to leverage that snowball, you've got to learn to find some comfort in doing just that and being able to promote yourself. And from, I think, just a sincere and factual place of, this is what I have done, this is where I'm at, and this is where I've gained recognition, because you have to be able to promote yourself to other people and show them that history of success to gain the credibility and keep that snowball going?
You have to get your work in front of the right people, and the snowball is part of that. I mean, getting into the magazines, because the people who are buying Western art collector or Western art and architecture are people who have the money to buy more expensive paintings and are doing that. And so, yeah, you gotta blow your horn in order to get noticed and get articles written about you. And you can't be too shy about it. You have to do it.
Now, you've been in many magazines. So
Yeah.
how did you get into so many magazines? How did the magazine exposure begin? And was that you promoting it? Was that the result of popping up in auctions or being in shows? Tell me about that.
Again, it's that whole snowball thing. You get in a gallery and you let the magazine know that you're in a gallery, and you win an award, especially the awards for some of the national shows, international shows. You make sure you can't be shy. You got to knock on the door and say, I won. And it was, fine art connoisseur. It's the plein air salon. It's your show. I won. Let's talk about it. So I would get into one magazine and then tell the next magazine, hey, these guys wrote this article about me. Would you like to interview me? It's just blunt salesmanship, I guess.
Now, did you have any training in sales or did you just go for it?
I'm terrible at it. My son will tell you that I am the biggest extroverted introvert that he knows. I love to say hi, how are you? I love to meet people, and then I want him to take over the conversation. So talking to people is kind of uncomfortable for me, actually. And I know no sales training. I just BS my way through it.
Well, whatever you're doing is working.
Thank you. Yeah, it seems to be.
So how did you find gallery representation then, if the gallery representation kind of spun into magazine exposure?
Yeah, I don't know how it is now, because I started 8 years ago when I got out the door. I had a workshop with Peter Fiore, who's a wonderful landscape painter, great teacher, and his wife is a wonderful ceramicist. And she told me, while you're waiting to be good enough or feel good enough, someone else is taking your place. That was the best advice I ever got. So I just I started looking at galleries and looking for things that were similar to what I was doing, and hitting them up and saying, if you like the work that's in your gallery, I think you'll like my work. And I got a very nice gallery in North Carolina, took me on. And so again, I told the next gallery, hey, these guys are taking me on and my work is starting to sell there. It fits into your place. I've been in these magazines. I'm getting some notoriety, and so they saw that it was going to grow, and they got on board.
Now we talked about you having many paintings. How many did you already have quite a body of work before you approached galleries? I think most people, their block is that we talk about the mechanics of getting a gallery, getting exposure, getting in the magazines, getting in the auctions. But the first step, I think they can tell you 100 things holding them back. Well, I don't have a gallery, etc., but they don't have a body of work. So how many paintings, how did that happen as far as how many paintings you had before you began to snowball?
One of the things that was a little confusing when I got out and didn't really have a lot of direction from anybody else was the common theme was, you need a lot of work. If you're going to hit up a gallery, you do need a body of work to show them, but also to keep them supplied. And I'm not a fast painter. I'm a really slow painter. And I was experimenting, this plein air looks like fun. Let's try that. So I do some plein air, and this, oh, look at the light on that still life. That's great. So I was painting, this, And then I like old trucks. Let's paint. There's a cow. Let's paint a. And pretty soon you're painting all these different things, and you're going in all these different directions. And I didn't have a cohesive body of work, but I had a big body of work, and so it started to. I was getting into that kind of gallery, and there are a lot of different kinds of galleries and different levels of galleries. And I realized what I wanted my path to be was toward the higher quality galleries, the higher dollar. This is a terrible thing to say, but the high dollar galleries, the big shows. And to get there, I needed a cohesive theme. And so I started thinking about what did I want to paint? What was a theme that was running through my work that I really liked? And we went to the mountains, and I thought, that's it.
That's really important because, again, we talk about the body of work, but not just any body of work, but artists will think, well, how do I know what people want to buy? How do I know what's popular, what's trending? But we've come around to many of these discussions on the podcast to the concept of you've got to start with what lights your fire. You've got to find what you want to paint and then find the galleries that fit what you want to paint, because ultimately you've got to fire up your engine and have that creative energy to get through that painting and make more of them. And if you're not enthused and inspired by what you're painting, your career's going to be in trouble.
Right, exactly. Or you're going to get into a niche of that level of, this gallery that represents everything, and your painting is selling for $300 because that's where they're at. And I didn't want that. You do need that inspiration, that connection that you have to that subject matter so that you're excited and really can't wait to get to the easel.
But I think that comes out in the paintings themselves.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And it shows. Well, I'm a big believer in energy. And I think that the energy that the artist has when they're making the painting is going to come through the brushstrokes, and it's going to be represented in that art. And I don't think you said, oh, this is going to sound terrible when you talked about wanting to be at that higher price point. But, I was talking to Eric Rhodes on the show last year, and he said, stand in the river where the water is flowing. But he was referring to when you set your prices, you might as well set them high and go for the more affluent buyers, because to your point, you can set your paintings at a price point for the $300 buyer, but that's also going to set your pace, and you're going to have to keep selling in high volume to maintain enough buyers to support you. So he said, why don't you stand in the river where the water is flowing, and you decide what you want to set your paintings at and go for those buyers. It's kind of that other way around type of conversation.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's a good phrase. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then when we talk about pricing, and you talked about selling online, raising your prices incrementally, did the galleries help you do this? Did the galleries first start setting your prices before you began to sell online? Tell me about the whole pricing chicken or the egg.
Yeah. Kind of a nightmare. And it really, at the beginning, you look at galleries that are selling work that are similar to what you are doing when you start out at the level that you're at, and you look at their prices and you try and fit in. You don't want to be too low and you don't want to be too high. I did that for a little while, and like you just mentioned, at that rate, I'm getting half of what the gallery is selling the painting for, minus the cost of the frames, minus the cost of the shipping, and I'm not a fast painter. So it wasn't too long before I realized I have to sell the paintings at a higher price. So I have to be in a gallery that will sell work at that price. And I started looking around for those kind of galleries. And they just happened to be, it seemed, west of the Mississippi. That realistic work is selling out there, and it's selling for high prices. And I got into one in Whitefish, Montana, and we went out to visit, and we visited Glacier National Park. And all of a sudden, I had a camera full of reference material, and I was taking my time and not hurrying. And bigger paintings, bigger money, better galleries. It just worked.
And I think that that's an excellent point too. You said you were taking your time, you were going up in size, you were finding a comfort level with producing that quality. Speaking of quality and getting into the galleries and basically breaking through to that level, I think a lot of our listeners struggle with the concept of good enough, of, well, if I approach that gallery that has that price point, how do I stand there with the confidence that I belong in this club? And when do I know I'm good enough to even knock on this door?
It's intimidating. It's very intimidating. Jordan and I annually go to the Quest for the West show in Indianapolis. And one of the things that Jordan said when we first started going was, look at these paintings. Do you feel like you could hang next to them, and have your work stand up to that quality? So yeah, you're kind of gotta compete with a little bit with whatever's already on the wall in that gallery. And you have to be a little bit brave, but also it's probably good to have a few people who are maybe at that level who can look at your work and critically tell you, are you there or maybe almost there? It's good to know someone else's viewpoint so that you can realistically judge if you're ready to be in. And if you're winning shows that are against nationally known artists, then you kind of start to feel like, I guess I can go. I guess that'll be all right.
Yeah, that's a good point. The shows can be a good barometer, although they're not always a barometer. Sometimes you're not in the right environment, right audience. Some shows, the smaller shows, I think, have more, I'm going to say provincial, but in other words, if you're in a really small show, then it might depend on who the judges are, or in the case where I live, it's a very small town. So sometimes there's only one judge for an entire show, and their tastes and their leanings might influence who gets the awards. I had one show where the judge got up at the results announcements and she said, well, this year I decided to look at the progress of all the artists and see what they were doing 10 years ago and what they're doing now. And, my mind went in three places. One, I'm not going to win anything in the show. Not that it's has to do with always to be in it to win it, but I was new to the area. And so this artist, this jurist, was looking specifically at the work of people she knew. And she knew for 10 years what they were doing 10 years ago. And the other thing that I thought was, well, change isn't always progress. It depends on, just to jump around. She said, well, this person used to do abstracts and now they're doing mixed media. That doesn't necessarily mean they've improved. Right. So these things, it told me that, you really can't always gauge how well you're doing by one specific region, because it depends on who the jurist is in that particular show, how big, again, if they have one jurist, how big the show is, their leanings. It depends on if your art fits that particular region. And I think our listeners need to hear that because, for instance, in our small town, sometimes I'm looked at as kind of an oddity in that my paintings have a lot of undercurrent of narration that can be a little odd to the locals. They're used to landscapes and things that are very representational. And they look at this and they go, why is she sitting next to a pig? And I'm like, well, there's a whole, but Chicago might work better.
Right.
So, to that vein, how did you go and branch out? How did you find galleries? Did you do it? Did you travel? Did you send your work digitally as far as finding places where your work was a better fit for where you wanted to be?
I did send work digitally, and initially we did not travel, which looking back was a big mistake. I
Really?
wish um, to go and talk in person makes a connection with the gallery owner, I think. But I did send work digitally. I did look at what they were doing and what they had and where their prices were. One of the things that I really thought about was, are you advertising? Is this gallery advertising in magazines? Are they promoting their artists? Or are you just known to the local crowd? Because that's not really going to help me on this path that I've chosen to get me where I personally want to go. I want everyone to see my work, and I need you to help me get there. So I was looking for those kind of galleries, and I'm still looking for those kind of galleries. When we go to Jackson Hole, I stop in and I talk to all the gallery owners, and they at this point they know me. So it's just waiting for somebody to make room. If you've ever
Yeah,
been to galleries in Jackson Hole, they're pretty full. They've got a lot of a big stable of artists. It's hard to add somebody new.
that's true. And there's that conundrum, I think, with finding a gallery within whose walls your artwork fits, and then also knowing that the other artists in that gallery are also probably painting along the same lines that you are. So you're having to stand out, but not too much because you don't want to be painting away from the current of what they're showing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And Rose Frederick, who runs the Coors Western show, told me your work is great. I love it, but I have artists in the show that I've been promoting for years already. So to take on someone new who is similar when I'm already promoting somebody, and so they have considerations. It's not that they don't like your work or that they don't want it even. It's just some of it's just financial. We already have somebody. We're already promoting somebody similar to you, and we only have so much room on the walls.
Yeah. So for our listeners to make that mental note of, try not to let this really hamper your confidence. There's a
Yeah,
lot of considerations, like you said, financial. Sounds like some of it might be loyalty to the existing artist they're promoting. They don't want to
which
bring in competition, maybe.
yeah, and that really should make you feel good about that gallery owner that they're standing by the artists that they have already. Yeah,
Yeah, I think so. So talk to me about selling your work online, then making that transition. At what point did you start selling your work on your site? It sounds like it was kind of at the beginning because the auction houses were looking at where your prices were at. Where and when did that come into play? And how did you choose? You went with Faso
yeah.
from the start?
No, I had a free website from the start, which allowed me to say, "Hi, I'm Dan Knepper. Here's my website. You can," but that website didn't help me at all, really. Um, Fazio is a great website. I recommend it highly. You can tell them I said that. Um,
Oh, they'll
they,
hear it.
yeah, they they are wonderful in their support of their artists because they have all these great uh, information that they put out about how to market your work, and it's very helpful. But the site itself works well, so that, like you asked, if you want to sell online, I had someone. I put a painting out there on my website that's I said this one's headed to the National Gallery of Wildlife Art. And that person went to the website and bought it immediately. And I mean, it was like boom. And this was my first time, which this is kind of a little bit off track, but it was my first time in that show. And I didn't understand how that show worked. And they draw lots at Western Vision's show. So if you want that painting, you draw a lot for it. And if your name is chosen, then you get to pick that painting. I'd already sold that painting that was accepted into the show. And they were so sweet. They said, "Oh, we understand that you didn't," and they let me put another painting in, but got a little bit off track. But the point being, Fazio's great. You put the painting on, people can buy right from the website.
Now, I have a couple questions. I have like 40. So my listeners know me. They'd be like, I have 15 questions. Um, okay, so starting with show regulations. So it's important to know the regulations of the show you're going into. And that's great that they were so generous with you to just kind of rejigger that.
Mhm.
And to know that you may need to take a pause on posting a painting on your for sale website, at least that section of your website, while it's showing. Usually what I do is my site's in transition. So right now I don't have prices up and things connected to the shopping cart, but I'll pull it out of the shopping cart if I'm going to be in a show with it, because it may not be available to ship to someone. And it also may not be saleable if I have to reserve it in case somebody at the show wants it.
Uh-huh.
So that is an important thing for our listeners to consider. And then Faso, for instance, if you already have a site, like I have a WordPress site that I'm happy with, and it's connected through to my online courses, etc. So it's already I have integrations with everything. Can you use Faso's service to promote you? I know they put out newsletters and then have them just link out to you if they do not have control of your actual home-based website, or do you have to convert to them completely in their integrated system?
I would say they probably do, and they are very good about answering questions like that. You can send them an email and they will give you the answer instead of me guessing. So that's what I would recommend. But I mean, I've looked at a lot of websites. I looked at, I chose them because it works so easily and it works well. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
It does. I will do some digging on my own. I would love to work with them. I've heard so many good things about them, but it would help my listeners, I think, for me to investigate more as an artist who has their own website that they manage, to see if they have any intermediary kind of integrations, meaning that if you have a website you're happy with, can you use them and maybe link out to a page where your shopping cart lives? And then I don't need the website management, but I'd like them to house my shopping cart and maybe do the promotional emails, because those are the areas I don't have time, or I don't like maybe the integrations on my website for shopping cart. Maybe I can kind of utilize them for the things I need, and then I'll come back and let my listeners know.
right. And I would say yes is the short answer to that. And again, I'm only guessing, but they're very good at all that sort of thing. They're very skilled. But even one of the things that you mentioned several times was to promote your piece and maybe lead back to your website for further information, your other website for further information. I put a painting out this morning. I just put it on my website and it's automatically goes out to all my followers without any headache. And immediately I get responses, and I really appreciate that.
That's terrific. Yeah, I think I've been thinking about interviewing them anyway, so I think I'll get them on the show and ask some of these questions.
I look forward to hearing that one.
Yeah. Put them in the hot seat. Let them answer the questions for us. If you're listening, Faso, you're up next. So thank you for all of your time and talking about your incredible paintings.
I'm very honored. I really enjoyed talking with you. Thank you.
Yes, I am so happy. I want to stay in touch. I want to know how it's going, what you're doing next. I think your analogy of the snowball is phenomenal for the listeners to hear, because it can be so intimidating to see other artists getting exposure in magazines and in auctions and things like that, where they think that it's such a huge mountain to climb. But I think if we turn the mountain on its head and think about the snowball coming down the mountain, and gathering momentum, we can all just sleep a little bit better tonight. I would love for you to wrap us up with your best advice for artists who want to paint full time and get out there.
Yeah, I hope that you do it. I hope that you keep that snowball analogy going, because that's what it's all about. Make a body of work, a themed body of work that you really enjoy painting, so that your, as we discussed, your energy and excitement comes through in the work. Stand out a little bit in some way, whether it's subject matter or the pig sitting next to you or whatever it is, and blow your own horn. You have to do that. That's probably the biggest, best advice I can give. Make great work and then tell people about it. Let them know it's there. Get it in front of the right people.